Welcome to Healing Your Families. We're starting a new theme. We're going to be talking about confronting abuse. And that's a rather heavy topic, but it's one that's so important for families. Naturally, as parents, we want to do everything we can to protect our children from any form of abuse. And so we take many precautions. For example, I'm happy to see that the trend of parenting has moved from the very cleared, autocratic, you do this because I said so, to a gentler approach. We're aware that we don't want any abuse in our homes. And so we still provide guidance and instruction and structure for our children, but we know we've learned we can raise children without raising our voices, without hitting them. We can still teach them, prepare them to become responsible, independent adults. And we're careful with what they're exposed to on the internet. We use whatever technology we feel is appropriate to make sure that our children are not exposed to any pornography or anything that would harm them emotionally or psychologically, anything that would cause them to view themselves or other people as objects. We want them to believe in themselves, to have a healthy understanding of who they are and their intrinsic worth. So we do what we can to nurture them and tell them what we love about them. And we make sure we monitor their relationships. Now, in times past, we viewed the greatest threat to our children to be strangers. But now we know that children are much more likely to be molested by someone they know, a neighbor, an extended family member, a teacher, and an adult leader in their life. So we're very much aware of those relationships, and it's not in an intrusive, snoopy way. We genuinely love and care about our children. We want to know what's important to them, what type of relationships they have, and how it's benefiting them. And then we're always alert to any red flags, any signs that sudden change in our child's behavior, any indication that something is troubling them, they're not feeling comfortable. We teach them boundaries for their bodies, that to respect their bodies and the bodies of others, and that no one is allowed to touch them in their private areas or in any way that causes them to feel unsafe. We do all of these things to protect our children because we care about them. Now, recently, I have seen that parents today are facing some challenges no previous generation had to deal with. I encounter this in the parenting groups I belong to on Facebook. And I'm seeing that in addition to all of those concerns I had for my children when I was raising them, there are some additional ones. So how do you handle it when, in spite of your best precautions, your child still needs to come to you and tell you that they've been mistreated, that someone has molested them or hurt them or abused them in some way, that they've been bullied at school? Not all children find this easy to tell. How do you handle it when your child comes to you to say, I really think I'm attracted to the same sex? Or if they come and tell you, I think I was born in the wrong body. I really don't want to be this sex. I want to be the other one. How do you handle that? I think it's most important to begin with. Remember to always show your children unconditional love. As horrifying and upsetting as it may be to you, They have really put themselves out there by coming to confide in you. They are tentatively reaching out to see what kind of a response they will get. If you respond in shock or anger or dismay or judgment, you have just closed that door, and they're not going to feel comfortable coming to you again. And these are heavy, heavy problems for a child to deal with. So we approach with calm and love, and we listen. And we refrain from any negative comments like, oh, you don't mean that, or you're too young to know if that's really the way you feel. We listen. We love. We make sure they know that we will love them no matter what. And then we go on with the adult decision making. And we don't drag our child through anything more than is necessary. We care for them. But there are decisions we need to make on what we can do and how we can, where do we go from there? What is going to be in the best interest for our child? Whether it's if they've been offended by someone you knew and trusted, how do you handle that so they don't suffer any negative repercussions? If it's a matter of questioning their sexuality and who they are, how can you help them through this painful transition? That is part of growing up. I'm sure we all remember as we were growing up, we go through this trying to discover just who we are and what that means and the kind of future we want. The greatest concern for me is that right now, especially around gender transition, there is so much misinformation. There is so much confusion, and it's such an emotionally charged topic that it's hard to separate out the emotion from the reality, from the facts. And so I started doing research. I wanted to find what treatment has been proven to be safe and effective. What is the best treatment for a child who is confused about their gender? And in the process of studying and researching, I found two organizations that really impressed me. They're both international, nonprofit. They don't take any money from outside sources. There is always that caution, follow the money. If you're looking at how reliable is this, well, who benefits when I make this choice? And these were both nonprofits, international. They consist of medical professionals, mental health providers, and educators who had a genuine concern that parents were not being given, that individuals who struggle with gender identity and their parents were not being given correct information. In fact, because it's so controversial, there are different parts of the medical community that are attempting to pass off assumptions that have not been proven as fact. And they are repeated so often that people begin to accept them as fact. Now, that's a real concern for me. Parents need the best information possible to help their children. Now, I have two suggestions I would like to make for parents. I would like to invite you to consider. First of all, your higher power, however you define that. For me, it's a loving God. And as you connect with your higher power, the source that created your child's body, you'll get the best insights, the best information on how to care and protect your child. When you're a parent, when you're closely involved in a situation, it's hard to get a good perspective. Your emotions run high and you're just too close to the subject. But when you connect with a higher power, that's like getting the aerial view. You get a much broader perspective on the child, on the circumstances, on the problem. You're able to see past, present, and future. So first of all, connect with your higher power. It's the greatest resource I had raising my children, and many parents have reported the same. Now, the second thing is to get accurate information. There's a lot of information available on the internet, but not all of it is true. Not all of it is going to be helpful. So I mentioned these two websites that I found, and I wanted to share this part of their research. So, whoops. Okay, I think I need to stop that and try again. Okay. All right. So this is from a research article by Jay Kahn that was published on December 24th of 2022. It was published in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, and it was posted on the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine on December 30th, 2022. And the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine is one of those two nonprofit organizations that I mentioned earlier. As I searched the material on their website, I saw that they were very vigilant and careful to pursue evidence-based research, peer-reviewed articles that were more accurate in portraying what was best for children. And in this article, they express this concern that there are unproven assumptions that are being taken as fact. So he went through 5 unproven assumptions to clarify the difference, to make it plain. And they also clarified that there are actually many causes of, they use the term gender dysphoria, and it is referring to any time a person is uncertain or confused about their gender identity. So the first unproven assumption he challenges is that gender identity, which underlies gender dysphoria, is a fundamental personal characteristic that is biologically ingrained. Now, his conclusion is that there is no brain, blood, or other objective test that distinguishes a trans-identified from a non-trans-identified person. And in fact, it's rather a complex presentation, how it will happen. An individual could have this mistaken identity for a number of reasons. One is, as we mentioned, it's just a maturational transient process. It's part of growing up to have some confusion. In some cases, it's the result of sexual abuse or other trauma. A young girl who has been raped may conclude that it is very, very distasteful to be a girl, and she's not at all interested in that. In some cases, it's a matter of questioning their sexual orientation. One of the case studies reported a teenage girl trying to decide, do I want to be a lesbian or do I want to be a man? And there are other neurodiverse conditions that can factor in to gender dysphoria. In some cases, there's a long-standing, settled gender incongruence that begins when the child is very young. But they were mainly focused at the recent phenomena of youth in their early to mid-teens who are the increase has been great. There's just this rise of youth who are suffering with reporting gender dysphoria. Well, one thing they found out is that if they just discovered when they were in their teens that they had gender dysphoria, the majority of them, 61 to 98%, no longer felt that way when they reached maturity. Desistance meant they thought they changed their mind. And one of the problems with, quite often, the recommendation is to start the puberty blockers as soon as the child has identified, and then follow them up with cross-sex hormones. This treatment renders anyone who's undergone it infertile or sterile. And there are no proven methods to preserve fertility due to the immaturity of their sex organs. And this is good for parents to know, have this information as when they're deciding what is the best way to support my child. The second unproven assumption is that the sharp rise in the number of youth presenting with gender dysphoria does not signal a true increase in cases. It's merely better detection. So some people became alarmed, why is this happening? Why are there so many more youth than ever before? And the gender affirmative medical approach was just, there's just better detection. However, a study was done by Dr. Lisa Littman in 2018. And she's the one who coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. And this is her hypothesis. Now, her study was peer-reviewed twice. Normally, a study only has to be peer-reviewed once. There was such an outcry and so much objection and vicious attack from the gender-affirming community that it was reviewed twice, a second time. But her hypothesis still held that this rapid onset, when before they're teenagers, there's no discussion of feeling any confusion. Suddenly in their teen years, there is, that it's quite often a maladaptive coping mechanism due to one of those factors we just mentioned. So in her study, 60% of the females and 30% of the males had at least one friend who had also identified as transgender. And this study was based on interviewing the parents of transgender youth. 73% had experienced a stressful event that may have contributed. And while there is it is much more likely that this increased number is due to the effect of psychological and social reasons. Now, the third mistaken, unproven assumption is that medical interventions in gender dysphoric minors have clear eligibility criteria. Parents will be assured, don't worry, the surgery won't be performed unless your child meets the criteria. As the author investigated, it turns out the only criteria is that the patient asks for the procedure. When asked questions, so what exactly is your criteria? What are the requirements before you will perform a gender affirmative surgery on a child or on a teen? And there really isn't any. And in fact, in some states, insurance companies are required to pay for any gender transition surgery that is requested. So the fourth false assumption is that medical interventions for gender dysphoric minors have been demonstrated to be safe and effective. Well, as the author studied the available medical literature, he found there is insufficient evidence that it's safe and effective for gender dysphoria. There is no proof of that. Some studies have shown some side effects, some unexpected physical results. The United Kingdom, Sweden, and Finland, after doing their research on their programs, reached conclusions that the risk of medical affirmation likely outweighs the benefits for most currently affected youth. They've changed their policies. They're backing away from starting out with gender affirming, changing the child's body to match the gender they identify with, to using psychological treatment as the first approach, and reserving the medical procedures for unusual cases. Now, the fifth and last false assumption is that the detransition does not represent medical harm and is rare. They're saying most people are very happy with the transition. They don't regret it. And even if they did, there wouldn't be any harm in changing back. However, the study that claimed a 1% regret rate was based on a very narrow definition of regret. So by their definition, the subjects had to return to the same clinic that medically treated them and explicitly verbalize regret, and that would have been documented in their medical records, and they would also have to start supplementation with natal sex hormones from the same gender clinic. And in the survey that was taken later, only about 24% did that, but that didn't mean that they didn't regret it. So this definition that they gave for that 1% regret rate would not have included someone who sought a surgical transition. And there are a number of individuals who have detransitioned, and they have organized detrans. Did you know there's a Detrans Awareness Day on March 12th? As near as I can tell, this has been occurring for at least 3 years. And you can get more information. You can go to their website, detransawareness.org, and get greater insight into how they feel. My biggest concern is they feel that they got lots of support, and covering their medical costs when they wanted to transition. But when they wanted to detransition, there's no support. Now, in this survey that is on the website genspect.org, and this is the other nonprofit that I mentioned, a survey was done of individuals who had detransitioned, and they asked them, what were your reasons for doing that? Now, there are some in the medical community who would maintain that no one would detransition unless they were simply being rejected by their friends and family. If they were just suffering rejection, then yeah, they would go back. But here were the top 3 reasons for detransition. The first was that they realized gender dysphoria was related to other issues. What they were going through was not related to what their body looked like. The second one was they had concerns about their health. And the third top reason was the transition did not help with gender dysphoria. So I want to share this information with parents so they can see the whole picture. It ties back to the before surgery, get a second opinion. But more importantly, rely on your connection with your higher power. These are challenging, probably will test your parenting abilities to the greatest extreme. Keep your focus on what is best for your child and follow the guidance you receive from your higher power. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can email me, emmylou@healingyourfamilies.com. And I'd like to offer a freebie. If you go to emmyloupinrod.com/first step, I have a free assessment for you that helps you identify where you are in terms of various areas of family life. And that's the first step you take on improving communication, strengthening relationships, and becoming the kind of parent that you want to be. Join me next week at the same time. I'll have guest speakers presenting on other areas of healing for abuse. Until then, love yourself, love your families. Let's make the world a better place by strengthening families. This is Emmylou Penrod at healingyourfamilies.com.